Jan Fiedler is working in the field of special effects, and among other things, you've been working on the effects for Game of Thrones. And when you think about special effects for Game of Thrones, everyone thinks dragon, but I think most of the work actually goes in things that you may not notice at the first sight, right?
Yes. Most of it is actually environmental work, so kind of extending what's already there. Game of Thrones goes to great locations, but they mostly play like in front of a wall of a ruin, and we extend then the background with a castle or King's Landing. You see Harrenhal in the background to show the scope of the work or the location where they are there. Yeah.
And how complex is that work? Do they make it easy for you? Are those static views, or do you actually have to track everything and then put a 3D model in there?
Yeah, well, most matte paintings, as we call them, are the easier ones first, because mostly it's big establishers where you see a location for the first time, or like to open the scene. So that's not too complicated for us. But sometimes, of course, they have bigger shots, like one shot in, I think it was in the second season, where they had a camera move from inside of the courtyard of Harrenhal into one of the rooms, which was actually a combination of two shots that we had to do. So we had the shot from inside the room from the window and the outside camera pan. So we combined that into one long shot. So we had to do a basic 3D model of Harrenhal for that.
Okay. What kind of techniques do you use? I mean, the matte paintings used to be real paintings when the technology first started, and you said 3D models, but I think lots of it is also 2D?
Yeah, it's a combination mostly. I mean, there are rarely 2D matte paintings in Photoshop. Most of it is either 2.5D, as we call it. So you have a basic model of something, like a tower would be just a cylinder, and you'd project onto that the matte painting to get the detail and the depth into it. So that's used a lot. And then, of course, sometimes you have to use 3D models to get complicated motions. If you move around something, you can't always use projections, and if you move in really close, you have to use 3D for that. Yeah.
Okay. How did you get into the industry? I think, what do you have to study, or where do you have to learn to end up doing the effects for Game of Thrones?
Well, I was lucky that I joined Pixomondo at a time when they were pretty small. They were a company. They at that time had opened their second office to work on a feature film called The Red Baron, which was their first big feature film. Before that, they only did smaller commercial work. So that kind of got the company started to get into this whole big industry. And then from that on, they moved on to 2012. So I was there when they started that branch of the company, basically, and just got more and more involved in project management at that time. Because before that I was doing animation. I studied a course called media production, actually. But there are right now a couple of courses you can take at German universities that have kind of called visual effects something in there. So you don't have to look that hard anymore, I think. When I started, it was mainly just the film academy in Ludwigsburg doing that kind of work, and in Berlin you could do that. But nowadays there are more universities offering these programs, so it's easier to study something that has something to do with it, and then you basically, how you get into the industry is then just showing your stuff that you did during your studies in your showreel when you apply for an internship most of the time, and then that's how you get to know people. And after you finish your university, you get your degree, then you can go to different companies and show what you did also during your internship. So the first thing that we look at for hiring people is always their showreel. To see what they did and if they have an eye for setting up shots and designing things that are important for a shot. And not exactly where they studied. We don't look at that really often. It's just mostly their showreel that's important. So it's always good to go into companies for internships and get to know people there. and work on real projects there, and then move on from there.
And you already mentioned it's important to know how to set up a shot, how to design that. What do you think is the most important thing that you have to bring to this? I mean, the animation itself, of course you have to know how to work the programs, but there's more to it.
Yeah, I guess we always call it, you have to have the eye for something. So you have to look at things around you and to realize what makes them look real to you. Like you have to look at a lot of reference to get to know how to reproduce that in a CG environment to make it look real, and so that the audience doesn't see the difference anymore. This is one of the things we do sometimes for approvals when we have to rebuild something in CG. We take the original as a photo and put our model next to it in the same environment and let the client say, okay, which is the CG one, and if we're good there, then we know we did a good job. So this is kind of, you have to look at things in a different way, I think, to just know, okay, this is the surface is a little bit bumpy and it has some kind of reflection to it. So you have to know all these kind of things and see them when you look at objects, to recreate that in CG.
And I think environments are hard enough, but do you also do the creature effects?
Yeah. I mean, for creature or character animation, of course, that's kind of the higher class of animation there. You have to know about anatomy, of course, how things, why do things move the way they move, and of course, it helps to look at classic animation as well because of timing, because timing is one of the most important.
So you study Disney films, old Disney films and stuff like that?
Yeah, I personally, I was always interested in the classic Warner cartoons like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner and stuff like that. So this is great to study timing because it's the jokes are also all depending on the timing there. So yeah. And they all have these classic principles of character animation, of course, in there, like overlapping motion and anticipation and that stuff. If you want to go into that cartoon animation part of animation world.
And how is the exchange working between you and the crews who actually provide the footage? Have you ever been at a set to see what the lighting is and how it works, or is it just cut off from the rest of production?
For most people it is. I was lucky enough to also be on set assisting our visual effects supervisor. Usually there's a visual effects supervisor on set that's talking directly to the director and the DOP to make sure everything is shot the way that we can use it in the end. And I was lucky enough to be there and do all kinds of reference photography. That's what we do a lot, photographing all the sets. We did 3D scans of the sets. So I was there to actually see how something is set up, but that's also, of course, something that's helping. I mean, I have a friend who used to work as a freelance photographer and is now doing CG work, and it was really easy for him to make realistic CG images because he knew how to light something in real life, so he could just transfer that to, and he just had to learn the software, which was fast for him to learn, so he could do really realistic CG images there. So the classic analog thing, of course, always helps to see and know how things worked in the analog world, because basically the software tries to, of course, simulate or emulate the real world there. Yeah.
So although you're the one who makes his living creating the digital worlds, the real worlds do still have kind of a fascination to it that maybe is very hard to recreate by CG.
Well, I mean, CG or visual effects is only kind of, it's there to support something, I think. So, for me, the magic is more in movies or in TV series. Always, you have to have a good story that drives the movie or the TV series, and not just have the VFX be there just to look great. It always has to just support something bigger, I think. So this is kind of what makes movie magic for me. Is not really. I mean, of course, I also watched the Transformers movies just because I was a fan of Transformers, always to see that on the big screen. But as you could see, you know, the story got thinner and thinner with every movie. So yeah, it's even harder for me to watch those now. Yeah.
I was about to ask, can you even watch movies and TV series without going, oh, I know how they did that, and that could have been done better? And
yeah, I learned to separate that a bit. In the beginning, it was more like that. You sat there and you don't really look at the stuff and say, okay, you know, I know how they did it. Sometimes you don't. You just look and wonder how they did it, but you know that a lot of work went into something. And, you know, when you watch a movie that you worked on yourself, you know, okay, we spent a lot of time on this particular shot to get it ready in time. But I've learned to separate that over the years and just be there and enjoy a movie, especially if it's a good story, then that keeps me looking at the screen and not wondering about the visual effects.
And last question, how often when you tell someone what you do for a living, do they ask for spoilers?
I don't have that many spoilers because we only know the portion we work on. So maybe we know 2 or 3 shots before our shot and afterwards, but we don't know the whole thing. Sometimes I get scripts, but it's mostly for the European movies. I don't get the scripts for bigger movies usually. So actually, I don't know that much more than other people know about the movies. I mean, of course, you know, some design things maybe, but it's not that big of a secret, I think, what we see than what other people know at that time.
Okay, so you can still go to the cinema and be surprised.
Yeah, definitely.